The Cascades rose ahead of them like a jagged wall, their snow-dusted peaks catching the last red light of evening. Mark Ellison eased the Jeep's window down, letting in the crisp air. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the cabin. Mixing with the faint sweetness of marshmallows from the bag, Chloe clutched on her lap. She sat cross-legged in the passenger seat, her seatbelt cutting diagonally across the unicorn on her hoodie. 7 years old, with restless eyes that seemed too curious for their own good. "You ever hear the mountains breathe?" Mark asked, glancing at her with conspiratorial grin. She wrinkled her nose. "Mountains can't breathe." "Sure they can. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." She giggled and pulled out her Polaroid camera, the old kind that whirred and spat out square prints you had to shake. She snapped a picture of him right there, driving, his cap pulled low, eyes flicking between the road and her. The picture slid out blank. She tucked it under her thigh to let it develop. By the time they reached the old trailhead, the sun had sunk behind the ridge. The parking lot was empty except for a rusting pickup truck with an Oregon plate, its windshield fogged from the cold. Mark killed the engine. "All right, kiddo," grabbed the flashlight. "Let's get camp set before the coyotes come asking for dinner." They hiked 20 minutes into the woods, boots crunching over frost-hardened soil. The tent went up quickly, the kind of practice rhythm Mark had from years of solo trips. Chloe set her sleeping bag beside his and carefully placed her Polaroid on top, as if the camera itself were part of the family. That night, they sat by the fire. Sparks popped, rising into the darkness. Mark told her about the stars, how some were dead, but their light was only just reaching Earth. Chloe tried to spot the brightest one and take a picture, but the camera only captured the void. Sometime after midnight, Chloe stirred awake in the tent. A faint beam of light, like a flashlight, swept across the fabric wall. She listened. There were footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. She turned toward Mark, but his sleeping bag was empty. She called his name softly. No answer. The footsteps drew closer. The tent zipper whispered open an inch before stopping, as if whoever was out there realized she was watching. The beam of light clicked off. Silence. Morning came pale and cold. Chloe's Polaroid lay on the ground outside, face down in the dirt. She picked it up. It showed her and Mark by the fire the night before, except neither of them remembered taking it. In the background, just beyond the circle of light, a tall figure stood between two trees. By the afternoon, a pair of hikers stumbled on the campsite, deserted. No overturned gear, no struggle, just that photograph, and 2 sets of boot prints leading toward the cliffs. They would be the last people to see any trace of Mark Ellison and Chloe Harper for the next 5 years. By the time the sun dipped below the ridgeline that Sunday, the Cascade foothills were crawling with law enforcement. Patrol cars lined the dirt road leading to the trailhead, their red and blue lights flickering off the trees. Detective Samuel Rourke arrived just after nightfall. Tall, with a face permanently weathered into a squint, he'd worked more than his share of missing persons cases in rural Washington. But there was something about the Ellison campsite that made him stop at the tree lean and take it in for a moment before stepping forward. It was too neat. The tent was still pegged into ground, the sleeping bags unzipped but neatly placed. Food cooler shut, lantern extinguished. It was the kind of order you didn't find after a bear attack, or after someone panicked and ran. The only sign of life was a Polaroid lying on the camp chair. Chloe's small frame smiling at the lens marked midwave, both in the firelight, and behind them, that faint silhouette between the trees. A park ranger handed Rourke a small evidence bag. Boot prints. 2 sets, leaving camp around midnight. No return tracks. How far do they go? Until the trail forks. 1 set keeps to the left, toward the cliffs. The other heads into the brush. Rourke's pen hovered over his notepad. "And you're sure it's 2 people?" The ranger nodded. "Different sizes. 1 man, 1 kid." The first 48 hours blurred into a frenzy. Search and rescue teams swept the ridges with infrared cameras. Helicopters traced the valley floor. Divers checked the rivers swollen from snowmelt. Every time a radio crackled, every time a shout carried through the trees, reporters' cameras swung toward the sound, only to find nothing. Chloe's mother, Megan Harper, went on live TV, her hands trembling as she clutched a photo of her daughter. "Please, if anyone has seen Chloe, just bring her home. No questions asked." The footage looped endlessly on the evening news, alongside images of Mark Ellison, his easy smile now a haunting reminder of the last time anyone saw him. By day 5, the official tone shifted. "Given the terrain and the time elapsed," the sheriff told the press, "our working theory is that they became lost or perhaps fell into one of the many ravines in the area." The words hung heavy in the air. Lost, fell, dead. But Rourke wasn't convinced. He'd spent enough time in the field to know what lost hikers looked like: broken branches, discarded gear, frantic trails to the undergrowth. Here, the scene felt staged, almost as if someone wanted them to vanish without chaos. That night, he went back to the Polaroid. Under magnification, the shadowed figure proportions were off. Too narrow in the shoulders, too still, like they'd been standing there for some time. And there was something in the glint of the eye, caught in the flash, that made his skin crawl. Then came the call that changed everything. Except it didn't change it enough. A hunter claimed he'd seen a silver Jeep driving down a maintenance road the morning after they vanished. Said the driver looked like Mark, but off, like he was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, not even glancing when the truck passed. When deputies scoured that road, they found nothing. No tire tracks, no sign of a vehicle leaving the area. It was as if the Jeep had melted into the forest. Within weeks, the search was scaled back. Within months, the case went cold. 5 years later, when a base jumper's helmet camera caught the twisted metal of a silver Jeep halfway down a sheer cliff, the headlines lit up again. But as rescue crews prepared to retrieve it, they would soon learn this wasn't the ending everyone thought it was. It was the beginning. The morning was thin and cold when the rescue team assembled at the base of Dead Man's Drop. The cliff loomed above them, sheer and jagged, its upper edges lost in cloud. Somewhere, wedged into a crag 200 feet down, was a silver Jeep that had eluded searchers for half a decade. Detective Rourke stood with his hands buried in his coat pockets, watching as ropes were checked and harnesses tightened. He'd been called out of semi-retirement for this, officially as an observer, but really because the sheriff's office knew this case had haunted him. The base jumper who'd spotted the vehicle, Riley Kane, stood nearby, still looking uneasy. "I almost didn't notice it," he told Rourke. "The way it's jammed in there, it's like it didn't fall straight down, like it went off at an angle and got stuck." Rourke filed the detail away. 2 climbers went over the edge first. The team on the ground listened to the steady crackle of radios and the occasional grunt of effort. Then, "I'm at the Jeep." One climber's voice came through, muffled by wind. Driver's side window shattered. Body in the front seat, male, seatbelt still on. The words landed heavy. Rourke's jaw tightened. The climbers worked for nearly 2 hours to secure the vehicle, then lowered a body bag down to the rescue crew. The remains were skeletal, clothing faded and weather-beaten. A wallet in the jeans pocket held Mark Ellison's ID. But it was what came next that froze the air around them. One of the climbers called down again. Found something in the glove compartment, sealed in a waterproof pouch. Rourke took the evidence bag himself. Inside was a Polaroid photograph. It showed Chloe, no longer 7, but older, maybe 12. Her hair was longer, pulled into a rough braid. Her face was pale, eyes wide and glassy. She stood in a room with bare concrete walls, the corner of a metal bed frame visible behind her. The lighting was dim, coming from somewhere high above. In the bottom white border of the Polaroid was a date, 2 years after she and Mark had vanished. Rourke stared at it for a long time, his pulse pounding in his ears. If Chloe had been alive 2 years after that night, then the Jeep at the cliff wasn't the end of the story. It was the middle. That evening, Rourke sat in the sheriff's office, the photograph lit under a desk lamp. "This means she was alive after her uncle died," he said flatly. "Someone kept her somewhere, and they wanted us to know." The sheriff frowned. "Or they wanted to mess with us. That picture could have been taken anywhere, anytime." Rourke tapped the date stamp. "Not just anywhere. That's an old model of Polaroid film. They stopped making it 3 years ago. Whoever took this had the camera the whole time." The room went quiet. The next morning, Rourke visited Megan Harper. Chloe's mother. He didn't tell her about the photograph. Protocol dictated they confirm authenticity first, but she seemed to sense something had shifted. "Do you think she's still alive?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Rourke hesitated. "I think someone wanted her to be." Later that week, a lab enhanced the photograph. Behind Chloe, faint but visible, was a shadow stretching across the floor. Not hers, not the bed frames. A human silhouette, tall and narrow, holding something in one hand. It was angled just like the figure in the first Polaroid from the campsite. 5 years hadn't erased the watcher. The photograph changed everything. Within 48 hours of its discovery, the Cascade County Sheriff's Department officially reopened the Ellison Harper case. The press descended like vultures, eager to spin the miracle angle, girl possibly alive years after disappearance. But for Rourke, it wasn't hope he felt when he looked at that second Polaroid. It was dread. He'd seen that shadow before, not just in Chloe's original campsite photo, but in other cases, unsolved ones. In the records room of the sheriff's office, he pulled out a dusty binder marked 1999 to 2008, missing juveniles. He turned page after page until he found them. 3 cases years apart, all in rural Washington or Oregon. Each file had an early-stage photograph taken before the victim vanished. And in 2 of those photographs, barely visible in the background, there was the same tall, narrow figure, half hidden behind something, once a tree, once a doorframe. In both cases, the child was never found. Rourke drove out to visit one of the parents, a woman named Karen Willis. Her son, Trevor, had disappeared in 2005 during a fishing trip with his grandfather. She still lived in the same house, its porch sagging under years of damp. When Rourke mentioned the Polaroid shadow, she went pale. The police back then said it was nothing, just a trick of the light. But I told them, Trevor had been saying all week that someone was watching us from the woods. Did he ever describe them? Her hands twisted in her lap, said the man's face looked wrong, like he was wearing someone else's skin. Back in Cascade County, forensic techs analyzed the Jeep's damage. It didn't match a freefall impact. The vehicle had been pushed hard off a narrow service road above the cliff, and from the position of the gear shift, Mark Ellison had been in park. He hadn't driven off that cliff. Someone had made sure he never left it. Rourke's next step was to find out where Chloe had been kept in that second Polaroid. The bare concrete walls suggested a basement or storage unit. The lighting angle, coming from above, looked like a high, narrow window. But the real clue was on the photo's right edge, a blurry stencil red paint, partially cropped. It read, R17. He fed the detail to a friend in the Department of Transportation. Hours later, she called back. That's a maintenance code. Rail storage facilities. R for Regional 17 for the Cascade Spur. The Cascade Spur was a defunct freight line that ran through miles of abandoned tunnels and storage depots, most sealed off decades ago. The next day, Rourke went alone. He parked at the chain-link fence blocking the old depot and cut the lock. The air inside was cold and stale, smelling faintly of rust. Rows of numbered concrete rooms lined the main corridor, their metal doors hanging open like empty vaults. Room 17 was halfway down. Inside, the walls matched the Polaroid exactly. There was no bed frame now, only scrape marks on the floor where one had been dragged away. In the corner, someone had scratched a mark into the concrete. 4 vertical lines and a 5th crossing them out, the kind a child might make counting days. Rourke ran his fingers over it. The scratches were deep, desperate. A sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the depot. Slow footsteps. Sheriff's Department. Rourke called, his voice bouncing off the walls. The steps stopped. Then, faintly from the darkness ahead, came the sound of a Polaroid camera clicking. Rourke's flashlight beam sliced through black, dust motes swirling like ash in its path. His boots echoed against the concrete floor as he followed the sound he was sure he'd heard, that sharp, unmistakable click-whir of a Polaroid camera ejecting a print. The corridor narrowed into a darker stretch of rooms, some with doors half closed, others yawning open into stale emptiness. His light caught flecks of red on the wall, spray paint, numbers marking each unit. R18. R19. From somewhere ahead came a faint shuffling, then silence. "Sheriff's Department," he barked again, voice hard now. "Show me your hands." Nothing. He moved past R22 when his boot hit something soft. He angled his light down. A photograph lay face up on the floor, edges curling with age. It was Chloe again, younger this time, maybe 9. She was sitting on a cot, holding her knees, eyes fixed on something outside the frame. The back of the photo had a date. 1 year after the disappearance. Rourke's pulse spiked. If there were photos like this scattered through the depot, it meant the place had been used for years, maybe even while police searched the area. He pushed on until the corridor ended at a heavy steel door, rusted but locked from the outside with a thick chain. His beam caught movement beyond the wire-reinforced glass panel, just a flicker like someone stepping out of view. He drew his sidearm and tested the chain. Too tight to force. But as he leaned closer, his flashlight picked out shapes in the darkness beyond. Rows of boards lined the far wall, and on those boards, dozens of Polaroids pinned like trophies. He could make out faces. Children, mostly, all different ages. Every photo had the same style. Start flash, subject-centered, concrete walls behind them. His stomach tightened. This wasn't just Chloe's prison. It was a gallery. He called for backup, but the signal inside the depot was dead. No service. He'd have to get out to call in. But as he turned back down the corridor, a different sound froze him. Footsteps again, this time behind him. He spun, flashlight beam cutting across the hall, catching nothing but dust and shadow. Then, from somewhere far behind, closer to the entrance, came that click whir again. Someone was still in here. Rourke moved fast now, retracing his steps past the numbered rooms. He found another photo lying in the middle of the floor. This one a boy he didn't recognize, maybe 10, eyes red from crying. No date on the back this time. He pocketed it and kept moving, but the depot seemed to stretch longer than before, the shadows between the doors thicker. He thought he saw a figure at the far end, motionless, head cocked slightly. When he raised his flashlight, the beam caught the glint of something in the figure's hand, a Polaroid camera. And then, just like that, it turned and slipped into one of the side rooms. By the time Rourke reached it, the room was empty. The only sign of anyone having been there was a fresh photograph lying on the floor, still developing. He picked it up, heart pounding. It was him, standing in the depot hallway. Taken moments ago. The image in Rourke's hand was still foggy around the edges, but there was no mistaking it. His own face mid-step, eyes half turned towards something unseen. He felt an instinctive chill crawl up his spine. Somewhere in this depot, someone had been close enough to photograph him without him noticing. And they were still here. Rourke tucked the Polaroid into his jacket and steadied his breathing. He'd been in plenty of tense situations, standoffs, armed searches, even a hostage scene. But there was something worse about this. Whoever was in here didn't seem in a hurry to escape. They were waiting. He kept his weapon raised as he moved, passing the open rooms again. Everyone seemed to whisper with old air, the smell of mildew and rust mixing into a stagnant heaviness. He stopped at room 21, noticing something he'd missed before, a low, narrow door at the back, partially hidden by a leaning metal shelving unit. The door was child-sized. He knelt, nudged the shelf just enough to see. It was unlocked. Behind it, a crawlspace extended into darkness. The concrete floor scraped with dozens of overlapping lines, the same tally marks he'd found in room 17. He shone his flashlight in. The walls were painted with crude drawings. Houses, trees, a stick figure girl with long hair, and next to her, a taller stick figure, faceless. He moved on, trying to keep his footsteps quiet. Somewhere deeper in the depot, he heard a faint rustle, like fabric against concrete. Then came a low, steady hum, not mechanical, almost human, a woman's voice, too soft to make out the words. He followed it to room 28. The room was empty except for a battered metal locker shoved against the far wall. Inside, under a pile of old blankets, was a small cardboard box. He pulled it out and set it on the floor. The box was full of Polaroids, some yellow with age, others recent enough that the colors still popped. Chloe's face appeared in several, sometimes alone, sometimes with other children. In each, her expression was different. Fear, confusion, exhaustion. But in the most recent photo, she wasn't a child anymore. She looked to be in her teens. And she was smiling. The smile was a relief or joy. It was something stranger, almost mirroring the stillness of the faceless shadow in the earlier images. And her eyes. There was no recognition, no plea for help. On the back of the photo, written in blocky letters, "She's ready." A sudden slam echoed from somewhere down the hall. Rourke spun toward the sound, heart pounding. It came from the direction of the steel door, the one guarding the gallery of pinned photographs. He ran toward it, but when he reached the door, the chain that had been rusted in place was gone. The door stood open. Inside, the walls were bare. Every photograph had been taken down, and in the center of the floor, a fresh Polaroid lay waiting. It was the steel door itself, open, with a shadowy figure standing just behind it. The message scrawled along the white border read, "She wants to see you." The words on the Polaroid, "She wants to see you," clung to Rourke's mind like a hook. The depot had gone utterly silent. No shuffling, no camera clicks, no voices. Just a faint, hollow ring of his own breath. He stepped into the room where the gallery had been. The concrete walls were raw now, dotted only with the tiny nail holes where hundreds of photos had once been pinned. The air was colder here, as if the place had been hollowed out overnight. At the far end of the room, a new door stood open, one he could swear hadn't been there before. Beyond it, a narrow stairwell led downward into darkness. He descended slowly, every creak of his boots echoing into the void below. At the bottom, a single light bulb swung from the ceiling, its pull chain twisting lazily. The room it lit was small, bare, and reeked faintly of old bleach. A figure stood in the far corner, back turned. Long hair, braid over one shoulder. "Chloe," he said, his voice cracking despite himself. She turned. It was her. Older now, maybe 17, but the girl in front of him wasn't the one he remembered from the case files. Her face was pale, lips curved into a faint smile that never reached her eyes. She wore a plain gray dress, bare feet on the cold floor. "You came," she said softly. Relief surged through him, but it tangled instantly with something colder. Her voice had a strange cadence, as if rehearsed. "Chloe, I'm here to take you home," he said, keeping his tone steady. "Where's the man who kept you here? The one in the photos?" Her smile widened by a fraction. "You think he kept me here?" Rourke's stomach sank. "What are you saying?" "He found me, but I stayed." Before he could respond, movement stirred in the shadows behind her. The tall, narrow figure stepped into the weak light, gaunt, face obscured by a featureless mass of stretched, pale material. Rourke's hand went for his weapon, but Chloe moved between them. "Don't," she said. "He showed me what I was meant to be." The masked figure raised a hand, not in threat, but in something like introduction, and then Rourke saw it. The figure's other hand held a Polaroid camera. Chloe stepped closer. "He's been watching you two. He chose you." Her smile was fixed now, unnervingly serene. From behind the mask came the faint click whir of the camera. The photograph slid out. The man held it out toward Chloe without looking at it, as if he already knew what it would show. She glanced at the image, then back at Rourke. "It's a good one," she said. "We'll keep it." Rourke backed toward the stairs, gun still in hand, but the bulb above flickered and went out. In the blackness, the sound of the camera clicked again. By the time his flashlight beam cut through the dark, the corner was empty. Both Chloe and the masked figure were gone. Only one thing remained, lying in the center of the floor. A fresh Polaroid. It showed Rourke standing in the doorway at the top of the stairs moments before he'd entered the room, and written across the bottom in block letters, "Now you're part of the gallery." The Cascade disappearance had begun as a single, tragic question. What happened to a man and his niece on a quiet weekend in the mountains? Now it was clear they weren't the first. They wouldn't be the last. Tucked in a sealed evidence box, Detective Ramirez kept one photo from the gallery. Not the uncle, not the girl, but family of four, smiling on a beach, in a picture dated 1973. Another image showed two hikers, Gear strapped tight, frozen mid-stride in 1989. And another, different faces, different decades, same framing, same signature in the corner. The realization was as suffocating as the cliff's shadow. This wasn't about one camping trip. It was a harvest, curated over half a century. Somewhere, someone was still collecting, and they had never been caught. If you want more chilling crime thrillers like this, stories that dig deeper, twist harder, and leave you with more questions and answers, subscribe now and join us in the next descent into the shadows.